I'm Joy Klein. I've worked for the Department of Environmental Resource Management since 1987. You can do the math. Yes, I'm hoping to retire one of these days, but Janet won't let me. So anyway, but after this knee going, she just might reconsider that. So nope. Okay. Just to show it, this is historically what we had: 180,000 acres of pine Rockland. And this is what we got now. Thank God there's 20,000 acres in Everglades National Park. But as we heard before, it's very different. It's very low, and it's probably going to be underwater. And all these little green dots you see, those are the Endangered Lands Preserve. This was a program of a self-tax that the citizens voted for. We started the program in 1990, started acquiring lands, and luckily we still had some private properties we could buy, and now we've got most of the big pinelands in our ownership. I want to just point out that when I started, we had less than 5% left, because these were the first areas they were farmed and developed because it was rock, but they are now officially globally imperiled. We're number one. We're number one. We're the most endangered habitat in the world right now. So, and not only is the habitat imperiled, we also have, these are our 5 federally endangered species that we're working around. Sometimes we have to burn for single species, like the butterfly. Sometimes we have to burn for the beetle. Sometimes we have to burn for the whole endangered habitat. So those are some of the issues we have to look at. This hasn't been brought up, but this is a very important issue. These are all of our drinking water well fields for municipal Miami-Dade County. Most of the areas in South Dade are pine Rockland preserves, including Navy Wells, which is the sole drinking water source of a little thing called the Florida Keys. So even the Keys get all their drinking water from Miami-Dade County. And so these pine Rockland preserves are really important for keeping our water filtered and clean. And a lot of people forget that. They just see these, pine trees, and they don't realize how important it is to municipal Miami-Dade County. I mean, the ads all say you get your water from the Everglades, but to be honest, a lot of these urban areas are where we get our water. For those of you young people, who sound like my mother used to, this was 1992, and this was post Hurricane Andrew. Those are what our pinelands look like. The man with the dibble is the Department of Interior Secretary, Bruce Babbitt. He came down to plant pines in our pine canopy. Initially, we lost 50% of the pines just to the hurricane, but within the next 2 years, we lost another 98% due to pine bark beetles. And there were actually, I think, 3 new species of pine bark beetle discovered in Miami-Dade County during this event. But if you look at the pineland there, it's hard to tell, but our pines were all even age stands. They look like beautiful little forestry stands. There was no improvement coming up at the understory, and they were so thick that in the hurricane, the trees hit each other. It twisted and bent that they knocked so much bark off each other, which is why we had such a massive influx of pine bark beetles. A lot of it was because most of our pine Rocklands are in ag areas. The national park did not have as bad as a die-off, but I think because we had so many natural predators were killed by the use of agricultural pesticides that our pinelands really suffered. So everyone was so concerned. We were all looking up and saying, oh God, how are we ever going to burn the pinelands again? We don't have pine needles. Instead, we should have been looking down, because when Hurricane Andrew hit in August, most of these trees had pine cones. And so what we couldn't see were the baby pines coming up because we had too much, I'm not going to really call it duff, but too much mulch on the ground. So everyone rush, we got to plant, we got to restore these pinelands, we got to make them look like a pineland again, they're gone. And instead we should have just sat back and kind of waited to see what came up. As a result, we planted thousands of pines, and a lot of them we're having to take out now or purposely kill with fire. This was Genco used this picture yesterday. This was one of our studies of Trinity. We noticed in an area we went and did a little study because we began to notice that by having all these trees, some of the really rare species that we had seen right after the hurricane, we were starting to lose again. So obviously these species love sun. So we went into Trinity in an area that we had planted and killed all the pines, a little circle there. And guess what? All the rare plants started coming back. So that was a very expensive lesson learned. I mean, we're still removing pines at some times. We're still trying to get back to pine savanna kind of open spaces because all the really rare stuff is down there on the ground. Don't tell anybody. For years and years, people thought that pine Rocklands were just pine flatwoods growing on rock. And we would get no respect, especially from some of the state agencies. They're like, you can't have gopher tortoises down there. How could they burrow in that pine rock? Well, guess what? We have gopher tortoises. And we discovered there are keystone species because they eat, I think, 90 different species, most of it grasses. So there are a huge pollinator and disperser of seeds in our pine rocklands. So they're just as important in pine rocklands as they are in pine flatwoods. But don't tell the state that. This is a photo from about 100 years ago that shows how the locals would regularly burn around their homes to prevent fire hazard and to keep the snakes away, that kind of thing. Nowadays, this is what most people think when they see fire. They think, oh, you're destroying everything so they can come in and build homes. Well, a lot of our, I should say, almost every preserve we own now is surrounded by houses or warehouses. This is one of our preserves that does have gopher tortoises. It's a waif site. It's 120 acres, and this is a wildfire we had a few years ago. You'll see the area that's colored is the area that was burned. But right after the fire, we didn't have our herbicide on order. So what happened is this invasive grass called cane grass or Dayraudia came up, and it just filled the place so much that on another day, there was a really windy day, and guess what? Another wildfire. This wildfire actually jumped the road, and from us, from an ecological point of view, we lost 8 gopher tortoises, a raccoon, a puppy, and God knows what else we lost to the wildfire. So it was so fast. We had tortoises dead going into their burrow. And we had 6 that had to be euthanized. I didn't realize that reptiles have a really hard time regenerating skin. So a lot of these tortoises have burned feet. So this was really tragic to us to lose such keystone species, and besides they're awfully cute. So this just showed us that, you know, it's not just a 2-year rough that we're going to burn every 2 to 5 years, that if we don't do something in the meantime, like now we try to prioritize, go in and after the fire, treat this exotic grass because we don't want it coming back. This is the same situation that happened in Hawaii. It was an exotic grass. It took over abandoned farm fields. That's what killed the 90 people. And this was scary enough that Janet and I went and talked to our fire rescue people. And we said, you know, this cane grass all over here, it burns in the rain. We could really have a catastrophic situation by just having these fields, old farm fields with cane grass. So we started talking a little bit more about that. This is typically what one of our preserves looks like. Yes, that's a wooden fence on their property right next to our property. So we were about to burn one day. We went in, we made sure the grate was wet. We put a little water on the fence. And one of the firefighters noticed that there was a big propane tank right next to the fence. So we went and asked the homeowner if they could move it towards the house so we wouldn't, in case something happened with the fence. Well, so, and then we started burning, very slow backfire. About 15-20 minutes into the burn, radios me and says, I smell propane. So suddenly I'm like, put out all the fire. So what had happened is the homeowner had moved the tank, but he had forgotten to turn it off. So here we are lighting up this whole area behind all these homes, smelling propane. And it was an immediate 911 call. We got the fire department there. They were able to find the people to shut down the propane. But we could have had a nice little neighborhood restoration here. But these are the kinds of things when you're burning in these highly urban areas you don't really think about. This is another lesson learned. These were old trees. They were growing in an area that wasn't really a pine rockland. It was probably originally a prairie. It has marl soils, so it wasn't really a pineland area, but in the meantime, these trees had come in and people were really attached to them. So then when we did a fire, guess what? You'll see there's still some palm trees in there. Suddenly we end up with all the trees dead, which is not bad in my opinion, because these trees shouldn't have been there. This is a prairie, it shouldn't have been there. But still the public perception, when you kill all the trees in the area and you have nothing left to reseed, they're like, oh, these guys don't know what they're doing. So what we usually do before we do a burn is we go in, we do hardwood reduction first, get the hardwoods out so that it can burn. It's the opposite of scrub, you know, and then we have to go in and we remove a lot of palmettos and sable palms where they can't go and do a canopy. But the other thing that we were finding too is our window to burn. It is so hot down here. I mean, last year we had 4 months straight, I think, 90 degrees. So by burning these pinelands, a lot of these older trees are so stressed and we're like cooking them. So we've got to kind of develop, this should have been more, a smaller unit, less intense fire. And, you know, we've got to think more strategically about some of these burns, because with the changes in temperature, these poor pines, and again, most of the big pines you see around, a lot of these are still stressed from the hurricane. They still have collapsed valves, they're not getting all the water. And so if there's any of the old pines around, you can guarantee they're probably a little stressed. So we need to pay more attention to existing pines where they're still around. And I believe that's it, because that's mainly our lessons learned. So does anyone have questions? We kind of have the opposite problem as the scrub, is because if there's a lot of hardwoods growing in our pinelands, that pineland's not going to burn. So we do a lot of prep work ahead of time to make it burn. 2 years ago, we did our first burn in a coastal strand, and this was to promote the Jackmontia. That was a federally protected plant. You have it up in West Palm Beach too. We were quite surprised at the fire we had. We had flame lengths probably 25 feet from the salt palmettos and the poison wood along the beach. So our biggest problem is not so much that people see smoke, it's more that they want to get there and see the smoke and see the fire. So we recently did a burn right by the turnpike. All night long, the alarm office got calls because they would see a little flare up and go, oh my God, there's fire there. So there's been times where we've had to put sprinklers. One time we burned a park that was across the street from a wealthy residential area. We actually put sprinklers in that park for about 2 weeks straight, just to put out the fire so that we wouldn't get a lot of calls. That's not necessarily what that we want to do, but sometimes we have to do that. This year, we're in drought already, and with the few areas that had frost, I'm expecting it to be a very busy burn season. And I'm going to get up close and personal with our new fire, Florida Forest Service. I'm going to learn what kind of food he likes at night. I'm probably going to get very comfortable with his staff to know what food I need to bring them at night when it's burning, because I know this is going to be a hell of a year. Pardon my French, but we are really it's going to be a wild ride this year for us. And because people don't understand fire and all that, a lot of people in far south area, they know about fire because it's ag lands. They burn their fields all the time, pile burning, but a lot of the people in our everything in Miami-Dade is urban interface. We don't really not have an urban interface area anymore, but it's really going to be a rough year for us. So with fire, and I don't think is West Palm Beach that bad right now? You are too. I know the West Coast is worse than we are. So anyway, what I also noticed over the years is we used to have a lot of wildfires in our parks during spring break. That isn't happening anymore. Kids don't play outside. They don't play with matches. Our wildfires have gone down, which for the longest time was our only way some of these areas were going to burn, is courtesy of the kids. A lot of these are right next to schools. I'm like, why are these kids smoking? But anyway, that's something I've noticed over the years, and it's a kind of a sad thing, because if I were a kid, I'd want to be playing in the poison with myself too. So anyway. Any questions?
So Joy, we're gonna hold off
Okay.
on questions.
Yeah, we're gonna hold off on questions
Okay.
until the panel. Thank you so much, Joy, for presenting for us.